Melody must be melodic. In other words, melody by its nature must move. What is meant by move is that it must change pitch. Look at the example below. Singing the same pitch over and over is not properly called melody, since melody is an ordered succession of pitches, not an ordered succession of the same pitch. We would refer to this line of music as recited or chanted. If melody by its very nature must move, the next question to ask is, what are the ways in which it can move? We will therefore begin our study of how to compose melodies by looking at all the possible ways in which melody can move. There are only 4 ways in which a melody can move. The first 2 ways deal with the direction of the movement. The second 2 ways deal with the size of the movement. Let's look at directional movement first. This is the most fundamental type of movement because pitch by its very nature is either going higher or lower. Directional movement can be either ascending or descending. A well-written melody must consist of both ascending and descending motion. If the directional movement was always moving in the same direction, the music would become very dull and uninteresting. Here is an example of a melody that moves in only one direction, descending. The 2 other types of melodic movement deal with the size of the movement. When we speak about the size of the movement, we're speaking of the intervallic distance, such as seconds, thirds, fourths, etc. We classify the size of the movement as being either conjunct or disjunct. Conjunct motion is simply movement by seconds. Another name for conjunct motion is stepwise motion. As you can see from the diagram, conjunct motion can be either ascending or descending. Disjunct motion is simply movement by any interval larger than a second. Since a common form of disjunct motion is movement by thirds, or skips, another name for disjunct motion is skipwise motion. As you can see from the diagram, disjunct motion can be either ascending or descending. Now let's look at a few musical examples of conjunct and disjunct motion. This melodic line is made up entirely of conjunct motion. This would be considered a well-written melodic line, since the conjunct motion is both ascending and descending. Still, since it does not contain any disjunct motion, it is lacking a certain quality. Let's look at another example. This melodic line is made up entirely of disjunct motion. Since it contains both ascending and descending motion, it has an essential part of being a well-written melodic line. It is pleasant enough, but since it does not contain any conjunct motion, it is lacking a great deal. Stepwise motion is a much more natural type of movement as compared to skipwise motion, since it is more closely connected to the scale and to the human voice. If you study music, you will find that the most well-written, most melodic melodies contain a balance of ascending, descending, stepwise, and skipwise motion. These types of melodies are very singable. They are memorable and stick with us. Here's an example. Red equals disjunct motion, blue equals conjunct motion. This example is such a wonderful melody because it contains all 4 types of melodic movement: ascending, descending, conjunct, and disjunct. Notice how the conjunct motion in this example is always ascending, while the disjunct motion is mostly descending. It didn't have to be written this way, but what the composer did greatly helps to unify the music. As we move through the rest of this course, it will be very important to keep in mind the 4 types of melodic movement learned in this lesson, and to make use of these types of movement in the melodies which you will compose.